Hello everyone, this is Andrew and welcome to the Business Flash. So we're going to be going through the business news of the week and you're going to be seeing what's going on around the world. So to start off with, I have an interesting story here from LAX International Airport. A bunch of police officers and FBI agents and everybody was set up at this airport to apprehend this suspect. So the guy arrives and they go and they grab him and they got him in custody. And he's being charged with drug-related corruption. But the thing is, he's not just any guy. He is actually he's an army general in the Mexican government called General Salvador Cienfuegos. He's 72 years old, and from 2012 to 2018, he actually led the army's fight against the drug cartels in Mexico. But it turns out at the same time, he was being paid off by the drug cartels and was actually feeding them information and helping allow shipments and everything else across the Mexico-US border. So it's just crazy that the level of corruption goes up to the point where the actual guy that was appointed to fight the drug cartels is now being charged with corruption. So he had 6 years to work with the cartels and kind of undermine all the investigations that were going on. And this is not like another episode of that Narcos show that I like. It's actually real life here. So just thinking about the amount of, money and amount of resources that are involved with these cartels and the drug cartels, drug corruption and everything like that, it gets up into like the crazy amounts because you look at El Chapo and they said he had $12 billion. I mean, that's like a lot of businessmen in America, some of the most famous ones don't have billions of dollars. And you have these drug cartels running around with that much money. So on another story like this, we have a special vessel that was found off the coast of Spain. There was a tip from the UK government, actually UK police force, to Spain indicating that there was this shipment that was coming from overseas and was trying to enter their country with a bunch of illegal substances with drugs. Well, it turns out the Spanish authorities, and they went and actually apprehended with this huge dragnet that they had, looking at the coast and looking at all the entry points. They had boats and helicopters and 250 police officers. And they find that this vessel is actually coming across from Brazil, 4,000 miles away, and it's shipping a large shipment of cocaine that totaled $100 million worth of cocaine. And it's not just like any kind of shipment, right? This is a specially designed vehicle. It's basically like a submarine. The only thing above the water is the cabin and some windows. Everything else is below decks. And then there's 3 crew members on this thing. And they did this full voyage surviving on cookies and cookies and chocolate and water. And that's all they had. They lost 20 pounds over the course of their voyage until they got apprehended by the authorities in Spain. So they tried to scuttle their ship in the end because there was a lot of crazy weather going on and they couldn't make a delivery with one of the other vessels that they had from shore. The actual 2 of the guys that were on there that were kind of the worker crew, they were going to get a few thousand euros for doing this voyage. But the head guy, this guy Alvarez, he was actually looking to make hundreds of thousands of euros after doing this deal. Once again, it's worth $100 million, the product actually on the streets in Europe. So it's kind of crazy. We're just seeing these crazy numbers again. The shipments actually had, and eventually the police went and they towed the vehicle that the people here tried to scuttle, and they towed it to shore and they got all the information on it. All of the cocaine that they actually had packaged up on here was labeled with a logo of a bull, a horse, and a devil, which is the cartel's symbol for their product. So they even label their stuff like they're, like Coca-Cola or McDonald's or something. They have to label their product. So it's pretty crazy that you have that all going on. And another interesting thing with this is that they said the European Union is now the world's largest market for this illegal drug trade. It used to be the United States, and now Europe is kind of taking over. And they were seeing here, where are the entry points and how are these actually happening? Like you actually had a submersible vehicle going from Brazil all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, a treacherous ocean, to make landfall in Spain there and deliver the product. So that's pretty crazy there. And although it's not specific to business, you can see how this kind of stuff, it's involved with money and the amount of money involved and all of the resources that have to be put against that. So going into the next item, we have China, which is coming out pretty strong after this pandemic here. They had their third quarter GDP numbers come out at 4.9%. So that was below the expected 5.5%, but it's still up. Nobody has up GDP right now during the pandemic except for China. Their second quarter growth was also 3.2%. So right now, they are on track to have 5.5% year-over-year growth in GDP. This is like one of the only countries in the world right now that is able to have positive GDP numbers. All of what was lost during the pandemic in China has now been regained. And if you look at this from a bigger perspective here, the International Monetary Fund estimated that the overall world economy would actually shrink 4.4% for the year. I mean, that's pretty significant if everywhere in the world is shrinking and then you have China growing. The US is actually estimated to be down 4.3% and Europe is supposed to be down 8.3%. So that's huge. So maybe this idea where China went and during the lockdown, they literally put bars and kind of they barricaded people into apartment buildings so that they couldn't leave. They seem to be doing better now after this pandemic. So I don't know, it's a crazy approach, but it looks like it's having some results from their side of it. Also, not telling anybody when it was originally going on might help too. So let's skip over that now. We have some big news in the sector for oil and gas. You have ConocoPhillips announcing they will buy an energy producer called Conoco Resources. And this is for $9.7 billion in stock. Everybody that has stock in ConocoPhillips gets stock in this new, everybody has stock in Conoco Resources gets stock in ConocoPhillips. And now it's like oil prices are low, energy is kind of the worst sector, and you're having them go into this kind of this oil shale thing, and they're trying to buy up the assets while prices are low. They are paying a 15% premium on the stock, but still everything's been down for the year in the energy sector, so it still might be a good deal. Another different acquisition that happened in the period here, we have Pioneer Natural Resources acquiring Parsley Energy for $4.5 billion. Some of the big news from the oil industry there. Next up, we have some news about the holiday shipping around the season here. You know, there's a lot of packages already flying all around the country, and FedEx and UPS have both come out and said that their capacity for holiday shipments has already been used up. So there's no extra capacity here. It's going to look like there's going to be a lot of delays around the holiday season of people getting deliveries by mail. A lot of these big companies now are using other kind of shippers that are in the market that are not as big as FedEx and UPS, such as DHL and LaserShip, and they're trying to see what they can do to get additional capacity. Next up, we have kind of a different restaurant slash retail, well, it's more of a restaurant that has games and stuff like that you can play called Dave&Busters. So Dave&Busters, naturally, it's like kind of like Chuck E. Cheese's kind of thing, but for older people, where you can play games and you can eat. That kind of shut down during the lockdowns, right? So they're issuing notes for $500 million in additional capital to try and survive this pandemic period. So shares of the company were actually up 8% on the news, but still the stock is down 60% year to date just because of all the craziness that's going on. So if you take another view at this, it looks like a lot of companies, we talked about in previous weeks in the other videos about how much debt companies are adding on right now. On top of that, you're going to have a lot of companies coming out of this pandemic and they're going to have tons of debt on their balance sheet, which is fine if you're getting really super low interest rates. It might not really matter much. But if interest rates go up and they have to keep carrying the debt, that could be a big burden on their financial resources to keep paying the yield and what they have to pay out on the notes and the debt that they have. So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about. Regarding the overall pandemic, we are now at a whopping 42 million cases worldwide for coronavirus. That's 1.15 million deaths around the world. Now, the US leads the world in, this is not where you want to lead the world, but we lead the world in deaths from the coronavirus, from COVID-19 at 222,447. We have 20% of the global total right now. And the amount of infected people in the US has now reached 8.3 million. So there's a ton of people infected here, but India is also the second highest number of deaths. And I think France was third there. So just keeping track of the numbers and what's going on with that. And then if you look at the positive side of this with the vaccine trials and what's going to be happening with the vaccine, you have AstraZeneca looking, and they were working with Oxford University and trying to make this vaccine. It looks like they're going to try and do it after Christmas period. So that'd be huge if they can actually come out with it in that quick amount of time there. If you look in, different countries in Europe have different policies over what you can do and what you can and what you can't do during the pandemic here. This is something that in the United States we don't really have on the, I would say, federal level. such strict stuff such as a fine. So if you're in England and you're not following the social distancing rules or you're not wearing a face mask, you could pay a fine up to £250 just if they see you like walking around without the face mask. In Italy, if you're not wearing a mask outdoors, you could get a fine from 400 euros to 1,000 euros. Imagine paying 1,000 euros because you're walking around in a forest without a mask on. In France, cities such as Paris have a curfew that they've enacted where people are indoors from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. And you face a fine of 135 euros to 3,750 euros if you have repeat offenses. Netherlands is another one. They have fines up to 95 euros. So this is one way that they're really trying to enforce the lockdowns in that area. But that is just imagine you lose your job or you're struggling financially because of the pandemic. And then on top of that, you make a mistake or you're outside without the mask and you get a fine like this. I mean, that's pretty crazy. How long is this going to go on is the question. Looking at the United States overall, there's an interesting trend that's been going on. There's this thing where you can actually renounce your American citizenship. And there's some different benefits and drawbacks to that. It's been happening a lot more recently, though. In 10 years, 37,000 people have renounced their U.S. citizenship. But the thing is, in just 2 quarters of 2020, more than 5,300 people filed to renounce their citizenship. That almost matches the previous record total from 2016 and the most ever renouncing a citizenship in a single year. So that's some interesting information. Of course, they have, it looks like 10,000 people in a single year can be renouncing their citizenship. Some big people that had done this in the past were Eduardo Severin from Facebook. He was one of the co-founders of Facebook, and Boris Johnson, who became the Prime Minister of the UK. So those were some big people. One of the main reasons, though, is that the United States has a unique tax system where if you're working in another country, you have to pay the taxes for that country. Then you also owe the US taxes. So you're basically paying taxes in 2 different countries. So especially if you're a high income earner, that is a real burden on you. And a lot of people rather just not deal with it. Apparently, there's only 2 countries in the world that have this system. So if you lived in Canada and you were working in France, you wouldn't have to pay the Canada taxes and France. You would just be paying the taxes in France. The United States makes you pay the capital gains tax, the income tax, the social security taxes, all that stuff while you're working abroad. So the United States and Eritrea are the only places that have this tax structure. Everywhere else in the world, you can work somewhere else and you don't have to pay all those taxes back to the United States. So I thought that was an interesting thing. It's something very unique with our tax code here. There was also a special law passed in 2010, and this was originally to fight against terrorism and kind of look where money's being shifted around, but the reality is it's kind of like the Patriot Act where the intentions might have been good, but then it's used a lot to basically spy on Americans and find tax cheats and people that are trying to hide money overseas. After that law was passed, a lot of banks overseas said that they're just going to drop their American customers rather than actually provide that information to authorities. So they ended up doing that, and now it's harder for Americans to get bank accounts overseas if you're like an expatriate somewhere. So if you look at the total for this, you have 15% of Americans living overseas. That's about 41% of them earn between $20,000 to $50,000. And 43% earn more than $75,000. So to hire the international tax accountant that you would need to pay these taxes, it's about $1,000 a year. And another thing with this is that these people that are renouncing citizenship, it also means that you have to pay up front $2,350 to renounce your citizenship. It's kind of like a filing fee, which is kind of interesting. You would think that you could just say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out, and not have to pay. But now that there's this fee on there that what they raised recently, used to be even less. And then on top of that, if you have a net worth of more than $2 million, so if you have your house and you're trying to sell it here and move to another country, and it puts you into that $2 million net worth bracket, there is an exit tax that you have to pay to actually renounce your citizenship. That's kind of crazy. That reminds me of what was going on in Nazi Germany when you had, specific laws against Jewish people of Jewish descent that had to pay several taxes forward for the next few years to be able to leave the country. They were basically trying to prevent them from leaving. So I don't like this on the side of that there's a lot of benefits to having the American citizenship and some protections that gives you abroad and everything. If people don't want that though, they should be able to just go and leave and not have to pay all these crazy taxes and fees. It's interesting that you see that kind of building up, and also the amount of people leaving has increased. They did say that some of the numbers on this, of course, it comes from this institution where they're not so sure. It's not exact on the numbers, so they could be kind of adding a lot more recently rather than when stuff actually happened. They don't really keep track of when the people expatriated to the other location. So there's some shiftiness in the numbers there as well.